As a blues player, one of my favorite ways to think about the CAGED method is to use it as a bass line for playing dominant 7th chords all over the neck. And in this lesson, I'll show you the first part of that little jam that focuses on tweaking the CAGED chord shapes into something bluesy that we can move and play really interesting rhythm sounds with up the neck. Premium members have access to part 2 of this lesson, where we'll dive into the solo, and you'll get additional lesson materials like downloadable PDF and Guitar Pro tab files, and access to the Sound Slice interactive tab player. Plus, you'll have access to the entire library of premium lessons. If you're not already a premium member, you can find out how to join at the link in the description. And now let's get on with the lesson. Here's a crash course in the CAGED method. It gets its name from these 5 chord shapes. As you would play a C major, that's the C in CAGED, an A major, that's the A in CAGED, a G major, is the G. You're starting to get the idea. The E is the E shape here from an E major chord, and then finally D. Now we start to leverage these shapes by thinking about them not just as the chord that they're named for, this being a C for example, but when we take this and make this into a movable chord shape by refingering it, and we can kind of close down the open strings and pretend our finger is the nut here, and in doing so, we then get a movable chord. So we still call this the C shape because it's really that same shape that we know and love, C major, first chord, but we can now move it all over the place, and this is a C shape, but my root is here on the 5th string, 5th fret, that's a D note, so this is a D chord, a D major chord with the C shape. And we can do the same thing with the other shapes from our CAGED system. So A starts like this. Maybe you play your A major chord like this. There's a lot of ways people play it, but let's do it like this, and then we can easily make this movable by just adding our finger across the strings. And you'll want a bar here from the 5th string all the way up to the 1st. And of course this isn't doing anything because I'm leveraging the open strings, but if we move this A up to the 2nd fret, say, this A shape, this is now a B major chord, A shape. C major chord, A shape. D major chord, A shape, right? So it becomes very movable, and we can leverage what we already know in that way by moving things. Perhaps you play it like this, very movable, right? And we can keep going through the shapes. And this one can be a little bit tricky, especially if you play your G chord like this, like I certainly will during a strummer, but I like to play it like this in a lot of finger picking situations, so don't let that fool you. This is a G chord, right? Just playing it with different fingers, but it also just kind of hints at the big shape here. If I lay my index finger over the nut here, then we've got our G shape that we can use for this CAGED system. I move up, and my root is on the 6th string, move up, and I've got an A chord, but with a G shape. And that shape keeps going. There's B, right? We're going to get our chord name from wherever we find our root, which is for this shape on the 6th string. All right, let's keep going. E, this is probably one that's a little more familiar to you. We take our E major chord, let's refinger that, and then use our finger to bar. And we take this E shape for a ride up the fretboard, and we've got, there's an F sharp. This is a bar chord, right? A big 6th string bar chord. The root is here on the 6th string, F sharp, G, A, B. So we're starting to get a lot of different sounds and ways that we can play even the same chord. Like so far, we've played a C here, C shape. We can play A shape there, whether you play it with the fingers in or like this. And then we could play a G shape, which is going to need to come up here, right? And if we play it with that same shape across all 6 strings, it looks like this. E is here. And our final shape is D. So we're going to get that from this D major chord shape. And we're going to need to refinger it. This can be a difficult one for sure. And we can use our index finger trick here. And the root is going to be on the 4th string. So when we start moving up the 4th string, we go from D to really any note, but let's just go up to the 2nd fret there. So we've got an E chord now, E major chord. Go up a fret, F, up to G, because this note on the 4th string at the 5th fret here is a G. So this is a G major chord. So now you see that we've got so many different ways that we can play our major chords using this caged shape system. But what's really cool is when we take this into the bluesy world and convert each one of these major chord shapes into something with a dominant 7th sound. Let's do that. We've got a C chord to make this dominant 7th. We put the little finger down on the 3rd fret, and this shape, very movable, very comfy. This is C, D, E, F, right? Wherever that root in this chord shape on the 5th string is, that's going to give us our chord name, and it's a bluesier sound. It's a dominant 7th chord. We can do the same thing with our A shape. We just have to lift up and let that 3rd string ring. But remember, we've got that bar that would now have the 3rd string at the movable bar, right? At the movable nut, let's say. And we'll probably want to refinger this just to make it a little more comfy to move. So there's A7, B7, C7, and we could keep going. And this looks a lot like our bar, but we just pick up and make sure that that 3rd string is under the bar. All right, so that's our A shape. G shape, this is the tricky one, right? To convert this into a 7th chord, this is one of the 2 real tricky ones, by the way. We drop down on the 1st string and we've got a G7. All right, and the piece of the chord that we're really going to use and focus on, because this is terribly difficult to make it into a movable shape across all 6 strings, but check out what's happening here. These are open, and then we've got one finger on the 1st string, 1st fret here. So if we just do this, sometimes you'll see me play it like this, we can take this and move it, and our root is on the 3rd string. So that's G7. So there's A7, B7. Remember, the root is on the 3rd string, C7, right? And then we could keep going. There's D7, for example. All right, for E7, we simply take the 4th string note and lower it down a whole step. That's 2 frets, which gives us the open string in this case for an E shape E7 chord. But remember, we played this as a bar to make it movable. So now when we pick up that same note, we've got this shape. So there's E7, there's our F sharp 7. Remember, the root is the note on the 6th string for this shape. So there's G7, A7, B7, and so on. And our final shape, D, is definitely a tricky one, because if you play it like this, it's certainly very tricky. I find myself using the D7 shape a heck of a lot more than I use this 4-string shape for D major. I use this all the time. And in fact, you're going to see that we're going to use this in our example because we play a G. Now, we'll talk about why this is a G in just a second, but back to making this D shape into a 7th chord. All we have to do is drop the root, which here, it's really the octave, on the 2nd string, 3rd fret. We've got to drop that down a whole step. A whole lot easier to play, to fret this thing this way. And you may already know this chord, very common D7 chord shape. So, but we can make this movable, and it's not as bad as making this one movable. We take this and we refinger it so that we've got these 3 fingers. The middle finger on the 3rd string, the middle finger is on the 2nd string, the ring finger's on the 3rd string, and then on top, the little finger. But then now we've got this nice movable shape. There's an E7, F7, and here, G7. Our root is on the 4th string. So that gives us 5 shapes that now we've really gone through them in terms of just the major chord, but then also now we've attached a 7th chord variation of it, and we can move these all along the neck. And you're going to see that when we dig into the example. For this first part, we're leveraging really one caged shape, this E shape here, and we're doing it in G. Here's our G, and here's a G. And this one where we start, we're sliding in to this chord shape, is really a G major triad. So there's our G, B, and D, the root, third, and fifth. All right? And we are throwing in a nice little embellishment here and hammering up. We're not even hammering, we're picking it up to the E, right, to get that really cool note in there on our way to this shape. Now this is what I really want to zero in on. We're playing this from our E shape, and remember we can make our E shape into an E7 shape just by lifting up the little finger, and we get the F in there, the dominant seventh, right? And so if we want to finger this in a way that's really comfortable, we can take everything away, that bar, that big old bar, and we can just play across strings 4, 3, and 2 here, and really just target those 3 strings. And I like to actually finger it like this. Looks a lot like that D shape, but I'm on strings 4, 3, and 2 at frets 3, 4, and 3. Right? And that's a G7, or at least 3 of the 4 tones from a G7, and it's a great thing to use that is very movable, and it gives you that bluesy vibe. And we're using it there just as kind of a little punctuation on this rhythmic part. 4 times before the chord change. And we've got to pause here and talk about what's going on, and maybe you can see it happening. We slid up on the 3rd string into this position. And remember, that comes from the G, which is really tough to play, right? But the G shape modified into a 7th chord, because there's the flat 7, the F note, right? And we're just moving that up until we get to C here. There's the root on the 3rd string. So we're sliding into that and really just playing the top 3 strings here. And then punctuating with this chord shape. So this next shape is our A shape. We just don't necessarily need that low C. So I'm really only playing the 4th string, 3rd string, 2nd string, and then the 1st string. So those top 4 strings. And it sounds really cool to punctuate this part. And really focusing on the top 3 strings there. And then as we switch back in the progression to G, we're going to come up here and play this form. This is a D shape, changed and kind of twisted around a little bit into a G7. Right? So if we played our D7 here, we can take this root along for the ride. And there's our G. So we've got this shape. And we're just going to do some cool rhythmic comping on this. And then move into a G major with that same rhythm strum. But here we've got a G major, but it's the D shape. All right? So here we're kind of blending the idea of these caged 7th chords with the triad, right? Just like this is the triad, and then the caged 7th chord. And this one, the triad, and just before it was our caged 7th chord. So we've got, and then here we jump into this shape, although I'm not going to use all of these strings. And by the way, this is a G7. There's the G on the 5th string, 10th fret. But what I am going to do is just play strings 4, 3, and 2 here, right? So if you just take everything away, you might want to refinger it like this. I find this one nice and comfortable. And I'm going to play with this chord shape as we round this out. Right? All right, so we've really done a lot here. To recap, we used some triads thrown in there, a little embellishment note, and then our caged shapes really kind of came front and center. There's one. There's one. And let's not say there's one. What are the shapes? Well, here it's from the E shape. All right. And then when we slid up, this is the G shape. If we could complete this, it's there. There we go. Tough, right? But this part, insanely usable. And then here, the A shape. Then we used our D shape here with a G7. Flipped into a triad, just a G major triad here, D shape. And then finally, we used our C shape G chord here. If you learned something from this lesson, please give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. And if you want to go deeper and grab the additional lesson materials, just become a member. You can sign up at the link right over there. And I hope to see you inside myBGI. Until then, practice smart and play on.